Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Guides Inside speaker series. So happy you're joining us today, whether it's live or catching up after the fact. Today, we're talking about guest-led guiding, and I am Lauren Farmer. A brief introduction to myself, and then I'll kick over to my guest, Heather. I've been in the industry since 2013, first as a photographer, and then an AEL, and now as an EL and citizen science coordinator. I recently became a PTGA provisional assessor, so really excited about that. And I am also on the Polar Citizen Science Collective team. So Heather, do you want to give us a brief intro and then we can get started?
Absolutely, yes. So I have also been in the industry as a polar guide since 2013, and I own a polar expedition company, which is part agency, part operator. We're a small little company called Twin Tracks Expeditions. And I am part owner of a ship management company, which is bringing the Polar Pioneer back into rotation. And finally, I am on the board of directors of the Polar Tourism Guides Association.
So just a few hats you're wearing.
Just a few.
So if you've joined our other Guides Inside, you sort of know how it works. I'm going to be sort of playing interviewer to Heather, and we'll have a little bit of a back and forth, but very open to your questions coming in. So shoot us a question and a comment anytime, or even just a discussion topic. And we might bring that up when it comes in or save it till the end, but very happy for you to take part as the discussion continues. So, all right, well, let's just dig straight in. So guest-led guiding, what does it even mean? It's not really a term I've heard before. So Heather, in your words, what is guest-led guiding?
Yeah. Great question. Guest-led guiding is really, ultimately, it's a mindset, it's an approach to our work that puts the guest front and center. So we're often, when we're guiding, we're thinking about our area of expertise or our skills. You know, even when you look at the Polar Tourism Guides Association and the PQs that we have, it's focused on, you know, driving zodiacs, driving snowmobiles, interpretation, delivering talks, that kind of thing. But the missing piece in there, in my opinion, is that soft skill, that customer service piece that we bring to our work that puts the guest front and center. Like, how do we make sure that all of those other areas of expertise we have as guides are ultimately culminating in being of service to the people who ultimately pay our wages, right? So it's really just putting the guest first, and it's a mindset more than anything.
Yeah, and customer service isn't really a term we use often as it relates to our job. And I wonder why that is, because we often refer to our jobs as being, you know, hospitality focused, and it's very much the same thing. So, you know, when I hear customer service, I usually think of, you know, working in retail or at a restaurant or something like that. So, like, in a sort of tangible way, can you explain what that looks like for polar guides?
Yeah, so customer service is really about, ultimately in any industry, but especially in the tourism industry, making sure that the people who are there, that we're delivering our expertise to, that we're there to show them the places that we take them to, that we're serving their needs, right? Like they've bought something from us. It's an experience from the company that we work for, and us showing up in full service to them means not just sharing our expertise, but making sure they're comfortable. You know, guides who've been guiding for a long time will, of course, know this. This is no-brainer stuff. Making sure they're comfortable, making sure that questions are answered, making sure that everyone feels seen and heard, you know, making sure that nobody feels stupid for asking a question. It's really the customer service element isn't about like standing behind a desk at Walmart and like taking returns. You know, it's really about it's really the soft skills of making every single person that we interact with as guides feel really valued and seen and heard as the people who are there to learn and to be a part of this experience with you. You know, so again, it's kind of an approach. It's more of a mindset thing. And that's why it's a little bit of a challenge, because it's not a hard skill. It's not something that you can test for. It's really a very personal approach to the way that you interact with guests.
Yeah, because we focus so much on like the imparting knowledge part and driving zodiacs well, and assume that if we do that part of our job well, then they will feel safe and they will feel like they're getting a lot out of the experience because they've been to this many lectures and whatever. But they are humans with feelings and perhaps worries or concerns or needs and wants, and we need to think about how to cater to all of those other parts of them. So is it possible that some people are naturally better at this than others?
Definitely, yes. Some people are naturally better at it. Some people are naturally more aware and maybe more naturally empathetic to the experience of others, I've noticed even in myself that when I'm guiding and I have people in my zodiac, if I'm fresh, if I'm like brand new to the contract, I'm really aware of how everyone feels. I notice like if the lady in the corner is getting a little bit cold, but she doesn't really want to admit it, and I'll make the extra effort to make sure that she's okay and all that kind of thing. And then when I've been on contract for a while and I'm tired, I don't notice as much, and so I, as an example, come to my work with a certain degree of empathy and a focus on customer service. But even the people that have that naturally can kind of like, lose it after a while when you're just sort of going through the motions of the day-to-day life of being on a ship. So there are, to answer your question, there are people who I think, and I've observed as being more focused in that way. But it's not a infinite resource, let's say. Mm-hmm. And then there are people who don't have it very much or not at all. Definitely there are some people who are really not oriented that way. But I've have been able to learn how to be better at that and seen the value in that. And then there are people who think that they have it and totally don't have it at all. And that's always a challenge as well, to just try to get them to understand how they can better be aware, be aware of the people that they're serving and really have the empathy for what they're experiencing.
So when you're looking at a team as a whole and all of the different, backgrounds and strengths and weaknesses that different team members bring to the equation, is there room on a team for some people who just are not orientated towards customer service and perhaps don't like to or don't enjoy socializing with guests, or would just rather focus on their subject and imparting that knowledge, and leave it at that? Like, is there room on a team for those people at all, or do we all need to be actively trying to get better at this part of the job?
I mean, this is something that I feel really passionate about. So I personally think that we should all be focused on doing a better job in this area. And if you are not naturally that way, or it doesn't come easy to you, okay, but we're not asking you to develop something like really sort of groundbreaking, right? This is really just about being thoughtful, ultimately, right? Like not being stuck in your own zone. Like, I'm the birder, so I'm responsible for this stuff. And if someone asks me a question and I don't know the answer, I just say, I don't know. Like there's so many ways that we get stuck in our habits of being like, I'm here and this is my thing and I don't know that, or that's not my job. And I would argue, and this is sort of, I mentioned earlier, this concept of 360-degree guiding, which is something I just kind of made up in my role, that I developed with Polar Latitudes, which I'll talk a little bit more about afterwards. But this idea that, we have all the different guiding skills, we have all the hard skills, we have the interpretation skills, we have the speaking skills, and the thing that rounds it out to make you like a really exceptional guide is when you have a well-developed set of soft skills, because you make an effort, because you care. And so again, it's not asking people to do something really dramatic. It's as simple as saying, again, like just using a birder as an example, if someone comes to you and asks a question that's completely unrelated to your area of expertise and you don't know the answer, you can say, I don't know, or you can say, I don't know, go ask so-and-so, or you can say, I don't know, that's a good question. Let me find out and I'll get back to you, And that's the difference between really not caring and not seeing it as part of your role, versus seeing all customer care as part of your role in some small way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine people that would take that approach all the time, you know, going and asking someone who does know the answer, finding that guest, letting them know, you know, rounding out that circle. For someone who that comes naturally for, would probably be like, yeah, like, of course, like, you know, who is not doing that? But actually, in reality, I think a lot of people don't do that because we're tired, where, you know, we run into a guest in the hallway when we're on our way to get down to the mudroom. It's just, you know, we're in the middle of a Zodiac cruise and we know it's going to be tough to remember that thing that they asked us, which we don't know the answer for. So it's really easy, especially as you get tired in a contract, to just default to the, oh, so-and-so's the whale expert, like they'd be happy to talk to you about it at recap, you know? So it's just, you know, it's just always taking that extra step. Yeah, it's tough. I hope that this resonates with some people who maybe even within the course of one trip, they have certain days when they put a lot of extra effort into their engagement with guests. And then other days they're like, I'm out, I can't, you know? Yeah. So yeah, it's really interesting. So you haven't mentioned this yet, but it's something that I know you well for. In your time with Polar Latitudes, you helped set this industry standard in a role called a passenger service manager. And I haven't had an experience with that role on any teams that I've worked with. So can you explain what that role is, what your responsibilities were? Should every operator have one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the passenger service manager role was unique to the industry when we created it. John McKeon, the president of Polar Latitudes, who a lot of people listening, at least, you know, we've been talking specifically about cruise-based polar guiding, and there may be people listening who aren't cruise-based, and so some of this might not be as relevant for them. I just want to mention that. But John McKeon is well known in the polar cruise industry, and he, when Polar Latitudes had their first full season, connected with me. I was not a part of the polar world, although I had been a guest many times on expedition ships. I had been to the Arctic, I had been to the Antarctic, I had been down the Amazon. So I had seen things from the guest perspective, you know, on multiple occasions. And then John came to me and said, I have this vision of a passenger service manager who will be on board, who's essentially like me, because I want what happens on board to be at a certain standard of customer service. Ultimately, what he wanted and what the management wanted in Polar Latitudes was to basically remove any reason for people to put negative comments on the feedback form. Because, like, think about it. If the president of the company is on the ship and people are unhappy about something, he's probably going to hear about it and it's going to be dealt with, right? So then you're not going to have any negative, or hopefully not have any negative comments on the feedback form, because we want to solve the problems when they happen. Why let problems happen and then get the feedback form later back at head office and then have to call the agent and make sure that their passenger is okay? You know, like, let's mitigate that. That was the whole point. And so he essentially said to me, I need you to be like a mini-me on the ship. I need you to be looking at things from a quality control perspective, focused on passenger service, but also focused on keeping the company culture, like maintaining the ideology of the president and of the head office. Because also, even though normally we see that as sort of an EL role, ELs change over time, and different ELs are coming in from different companies, and they're coming in with different energies and stuff, and they might be familiar with Polar Latitudes, but they might even forget some of the policies that particular company, and in this case Polar Latitudes, has around customer care, right? So this passenger service manager position really existed to like keep that one area super consistent, like super consistent, and also help the guides on the team be better with their customer service skills, help support them. You know, if they came to me with a question and said like, oh, I'm dealing with Mr. So-and-so and he's really upset about something, can I send him to you? Or what do you want me to, like, what should I say? You know, so I would help workshop different scenarios to help the guides like improve their skills and improve the simple ways that they could respond to people and just neutralize situations, you know? So it was a really cool role, and it was really There was nothing in the industry like it at the time. Since then, there have been some sort of similar roles pop up, but not quite in the same vein as the passenger service manager.
Yeah, and can you share any, just a few like scenarios where the passenger service manager would have kind of stepped in to manage a situation, or just anything specific that you can share from your time in that role?
Sure. I mean, everyone who's worked on ships has probably experienced a passenger who comes on board and their agent has told them that they can sign up for kayaking once they get on board, but that's not true. Kayaking's been booked out for a year, And so then the kayaking guides would come to me and say, oh, Mr. So-and-so has been told, or Mrs. So-and-so has been told by their agent that they can sign up. They're super mad. Their whole trip, they're saying their whole trip is ruined because this is the reason that they came here. Please, can you talk to them? And what we found over time is that the ELs and the other guides were always so thankful for the passenger service manager in like crisis scenarios like that, where we had really high emotions. Because the other thing about the passenger service manager role is that they always knew exactly what the policies were and could help explain, well, here's what went wrong, here's what we can do for you, that kind of thing, and just kind of talk people down off the ledge and try to make things right, essentially. Because normally, where would that go? Probably the expedition leader, and the expedition leader is really busy doing other stuff, right? Like the expedition leader doesn't have time to deal with the high emotions of people who are frustrated or angry or who knows what, right? Because sometimes these things happen on ships. So being that sort of middleman in a way, who I should mention was also economically empowered to help make decisions without having to check back in head office. That's a really great thing that John said to me and the eventual team that we built of passenger service managers, that we had a bit of financial leeway to say, well, look, you're not going to be kayaking on this voyage, but we can do this for you. So like, I would say that any scenario where people feel like they were misinformed, any scenario where people feel like, where guests had high emotions around something, sometimes it was that they capsized in their kayak and came back and they were sort of like a little bit traumatized by things. And, the kayak guides are still out with the kayak group and the expedition leader is doing something else, but the passenger service manager is there to make sure that like they're being super well taken care of.
Yeah. Okay. So you were sort of there also outside of crisis mode as an example to the team of how to take care of customer needs, big or small, basically. So I guess like the end game is that everyone on the team becomes a little bit of a mini passenger service manager, and just consistently knows how to diffuse little situations so that you end up with a lot less crises for that role to deal with, or the EL or the head office.
Exactly. And it's actually quite amazing the effects that had over time. It's amazing the kind of feedback that we got in terms of how we made guests feel. It was amazing how agents started feeding back to us that they loved booking people on polar latitudes because they knew that the level of customer care was just like that much better. They knew that, that even if something bad happened with their guest or their guest felt slighted in some way, that we were more equipped to resolve it, not just because of the role that I developed, but because of the way that our team managed things, and that ultimately, I mean, if anyone from any head office is listening, that led to more sales, that led to better business, so it's like, it seems like customer service is like, oh, well, it's not really our job, but actually it's our biggest job, right? Our biggest role as polar guides isn't just to tell people about like, hey, there's that fulmar over there and here's the breeding cycle of the fulmar. It's to make people feel like they had a transformative experience, that we loved being there with them. We loved sharing our knowledge. We never made them feel stupid or embarrassed, even if they did something that embarrassed them, then like, embarrassed themselves, and we made them feel better about it. Like that is it. Our whole role ultimately comes down to exceptional customer service.
Yeah. So we've talked about soft skills just a little bit, but maybe we could go a bit deeper into that, because as I hit upon before, for people that this comes naturally for, it's like a total no-brainer, and they probably can't imagine doing their job without approaching situations like this. But it really isn't the case for everyone. There are plenty of guides who just see themselves in one way, and if they just do, their kayak leading job to the best of their ability, then that's that. Though granted, in that scenario, they would be providing quite a lot of customer service on the water to their own team. But you get what I'm saying. So yeah. Maybe we could try and break it down, because for someone who I'm just imagining someone being like, okay, like what should I be doing that I'm not doing now? And maybe I am doing it, I just don't know that it's called that. So maybe we could identify, what the soft skills are that make up someone who is customer focused as they need to be, or is customer service its own soft skill? Like how do we get it? How do you train for it?
Well, I would love to throw that back on you a little bit, Lauren. And I want to ask you, like, in what scenarios have you felt that you really took care of people who needed a little bit of extra taking care of, even though you're a super busy expedition leader and it maybe wasn't your top priority? But like, I'm sure there's at least one scenario you can think of where you felt like, oh, that it was that little thing that made a big difference. And then conversely, I feel so much better about the work that I'm doing.
Oh, I hope that there's at least one time that, and it is hard to like really identify like specific things. So as so let's start with as a photographer. That's probably an easier one. So a photographer role, does lectures and makes your slideshow, but 90% of it is just troubleshooting people's camera issues, cleaning sensors and whatnot. So when I first started in the industry, that's what I did for 2 seasons. And I didn't have any experience teaching photography before that. I must have slid in under the radar and figured out a lot of things on the go. But I would have so many people, like at least 5, 6, 7, 8 a day, that would come to me with some various camera issue. And it was a big deal because a lot of them had bought a new camera to bring down there, had forgotten batteries, or, hadn't spent any time with the manual beforehand. So I spent a lot of time first fixing that problem for them, troubleshooting, but then really needing to follow up. Because a lot of the time I saw the panic in them thinking, I'm not going to be able to photograph this trip. I'm not going to have anything to show when I go home. And the worst was people who accidentally deleted erased their memory cards. Oh my gosh, that was just like the raw terror and just so sad. So, I mean, there were different ways of dealing with it, but a lot of it was just following up every few days, going to check how it was going. And for people who actually did delete all their photos, like making the effort of gathering photos from the team, putting it on a USB and giving it to them, like that, I mean, it just made the trip. And it is a ton of work. And even just keeping track of who had what issue and when was that and how's that going, But the look on their face when they realize that you remembered something that happened to them that was a big deal 3 days ago is really, really good. And I will admit, as I became AEL and got really tied to a computer, and then EL with all the stress of decision making, I do less and less of that one-on-one. And that's why I'm really interested in this conversation, because it is really tough to do when you feel tired and don't have the time. So it's just such a good reminder that it is a really important part of the job. Like, it isn't something you can sweep under the rug or really assign to someone else. It kind of is the job, Yeah,
it kind of is the job. And you make a really good point about being in that level of being expedition leader. Yeah, you still need to have empathy. You still need to have customer service skills. But in a perfect world, your staff, your team are so oriented towards service and empathy that nothing really ever gets escalated to you. It doesn't become your problem, right? That's why I think this conversation is so important. is to make people who haven't been thinking about this think about it. And then the people who already, as you say, are sort of naturally good at it go, oh, right. Yeah, I thought that was just like a part of who I am, but it's true. It's actually a critical part of my professional role.
Yeah, yeah. We've had a question come in about your passenger service manager role. Mm-hmm. So had you had any specific training in conflict resolution or anything like that? Like, what was your experience prior to that role that sort of set you up for success?
Very good question.
Did you just wing it?
Well, most of the time I'm kind of winging it with everything I do. Yeah. I'm not afraid to admit.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person.
I'll just interject that I hear a lot of guides say that they have imposter syndrome. And I think we just need to make a blanket statement that we all have it. It's okay. Even ELs, even whatever. So we're all just doing our best, and everyone has places where they need to improve and things that they're exceptionally good at. So that's just my disclaimer.
Yeah, totally. We all have imposter syndrome, and we're all a work in progress, 100%. But to answer that question, I didn't have specific training in conflict resolution, but I was a certified life coach prior to coming into this arena of polar guiding. So I had life coaching skills, which are very much focused on listening, on empathy, on asking the right questions, on understanding different points of view, where people are coming from, on understanding the truth underneath what's being said, and that kind of thing. So that was definitely helpful without question. But I think a bigger part of what allowed me to be to step into that role and then build up that, because I wasn't even given a job description. And if John McCann watches this, he'll probably be laughing, because he literally was like, here's my vision. I just want you to be kind of like me on the ship, but it's you. And I was like, okay. So I had to create this role from nothing, from just like my own observations of what would make a crack role of customer service, of strong customer service, of strong company culture, of supporting the team, of helping build out the team skill set. And where my experience prior came from that really fed into that was, I think, primarily that I had lived all over the world by that point. Like, I had lived in 6 different countries outside of Canada, which is where I'm from. And I had done such a wide diversity of roles in those different countries. Like, when in my early 20s, I managed a team of 15 teachers at a private school in the Mexican desert. So like, I had this huge group of teachers who were international, and like, it was not a good work environment, and they did not feel supported when I showed up. And I was young. I was really young, in my early 20s. And I had to like navigate and manage these personalities, the conflicts, the challenges, everything. So it was a lot of just like real life experience in environments that weren't familiar and had a lot of challenges, that allowed me to sort of roll in, you know, all of that. And especially being in an international context, having lived in so many different countries, and yeah, just different similar experiences. Then when I landed up on a ship, and you've got guides from lots of different countries, you've got guides who have worked in different companies long-term that bring some of the company culture from where they came from into this company. You've got different focuses, different ideologies or approach to polar work, you know. And yeah, so it's a little bit of a combination, I would say. There's the life coaching is the actual proper skill set, but it was really just more life experience that I brought to the role. That's helped.
And you and I were also guests first.
Yes.
So our first experience was as guests. So at least for me, that really shaped my first few seasons, at least. Because I came from the perspective of, you know, looking at the expedition team as total rock stars. And, you know, it's a strange dynamic, because, you know, especially when you're the same age or even, you know, younger than the guests, they really do look up to you, and they expect a lot of you, and any time that you can give them is hugely valuable. It's just like absolute quality to them. And as Lizzie has pointed out in a comment, that just making them feel seen, it's like a make or break. It's so important. And
I was thinking about, if I can interject for a second, I was thinking about this before we started this talk this evening, you know, because I had been on by the time I started working as a guide, I had been on 4 different expeditions on ships. And I had a very different experience each time in terms of the team, like how well the team got along, how the leadership was, how individual guides behaved towards each other and towards us. And because I'm just a naturally customer service curious person, I was always like, I'm always thinking like, how could this be better? So in my mind, I'm a guest, and I'm like, I was thinking like, wow, this team looks so disheveled. Like, I wonder why head office doesn't have some kind of a dress standard. Like, it doesn't have to be like fancy dress code or anything, but why isn't there some kind of a standard? Because this is like an expensive expedition, and some of these people look like they just rolled out of bed. Like, they really don't care. And so as someone who's paying thousands of dollars on a trip that I'm probably only going to do once, and I'm seeing these guides who are there to like teach me and like show me around and whatever, who don't seem to care about their personal appearance at all. There was something there as someone who was experiencing, as someone who was paying for that expedition. It just felt a little bit funny, it just felt a little bit off to me. And then there were other times where, like, I remember a few different times where I don't know if it was the personality of the guide or if they were just really tired because they had been on a long contract or what, but I would want to ask a guide something about their expertise, like maybe it was the mammal specialist or whatever, and I saw them sitting in the bar in the evening, and then someone else was talking with them, and I'd go and I'd like wait, like waiting for my moment to like go and like talk to that mammal person, ask them about a whale, and then the person they were talking to would leave, and that guide, even though they'd seen me, would take their beer and turn their back to me, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I feel like a dork because they saw me and they decided not to engage with me. And also I didn't get my question answered. And so I felt bummed out. And then I was embarrassed and I didn't want to ask again. And so like having those kinds of experiences really made me come onto a team and think, we here at this team that I'm a part of, we're not going to do that. We are not going to make people feel that way. That is really crappy. And it is our responsibility to do better,
Yeah, and I think it's easy to be a little bit judgmental and to feel like your team is the best. Your dream team would never treat someone that way. But the companies that you and I have worked for and that we've experienced these things at are amongst the companies that everyone recommends as the best place to work and the best operator to go with. So it's not just one operator that you can expect that behavior from. It's a thing that, that all of us need to work on. And I just want to go back to the soft skills conversation. Maybe we could just sort of list or identify what are the soft skills that fall under that customer service umbrella. And I'd welcome anyone in the comments to add in your suggestions too, if we're forgetting some or anything that you thought. So my first one was empathy. Yep. And just being able to imagine how that person feels in that situation. And that does come naturally for some people, and it really doesn't for others. Yep. I really don't, I don't know how you train, so to speak, on how to become more empathetic. I mean, the first step would just be awareness that it isn't a skill in your toolbox. But what are, in your opinion, some of the other soft skills that are so important to being customer focused?
Yeah, so empathy is probably number one. But empathy doesn't matter if you don't notice things, right? So noticing, being aware, listening, being present. And I would really encourage anyone who's listening to this presentation to, if you want to improve on your customer service skills, then start the next time you step on a ship. Don't wait till you're tired. Because we're human beings. Things are going to kind of go downhill over the course of a contract for sure. Like, I'm not saying that everyone should be a rock star all the time. But when you're fresh in and you're like, oh, we're back at work, everything's amazing, I'm going to make a point of really noticing what's going on with the guests around me, really noticing their reactions, of not being dismissive, right? It's so easy to be dismissive of guests who seem like they're in a funny mood or are complaining about something. But underneath that mood or that complaint is often something that is so easily fixable by just listening to them or being generous for a couple of moments. So awareness, listening, empathy, and then the other thing is being proactive, which goes back to that idea of, if someone asks you a question and you don't know, you can just say, I don't know, or you can do something about it. And I'm not saying that you need to be the person that says, I don't know, but I'll go find the answer. Because as you say, you might be like running to your zodiac and you're like, I can't answer this question right now. That happens all the time. And you might not revert back to that person, but maybe in that moment, because you're trying to be like the version of proactivity you can implement in that moment is, I'm not sure, I'm just on my way to the zodiac, but Hannah will know, and I just saw her in reception. See if you can grab her. It's being proactive. It's showing that little, like, I actually care. I'm not just saying, I don't know, bye, I'm in a rush, and it's not always possible, but again, it kind of comes down to noticing, empathy, and proactivity. If I had to distill it, it's those three things. And you have to have it top of mind if you want to develop those further, right?
Yeah. And communication is so important as well, like actually how you respond to someone telling you something that might be difficult, and how to like receive feedback, basically, whether you want to sort of absorb that and do something with it or not, but just receiving it. And I learned so much from the PTGA assessor course on like the structure around receiving and giving feedback, and communication is something where there's just so many resources that you can spend your time with in your off season, like books and podcasts and all sorts of stuff. So that's probably a little bit easier to tackle as a soft skill in your off season rather than, some of these other ones, which are maybe more situational. But I think that's a really good kind of broad look at that. So maybe someone is out there thinking, okay, well, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I have plenty of employment opportunities. I get pretty good feedback from my ops manager. Like, why should I actively look to be better at this? Like, what's sort of in it for me? So, like, why should guides care, basically, about anything we're talking about today?
Well, I mean, sure, you can carry on and not care if everything is great the way that things have been going. It really is a personal choice. But one really good reason to care is that the industry is increasingly moving in that direction of focusing on guides who aren't just rock star zodiac drivers or whatever, but people who actually have really good soft skills. And so, yes, you might not have any trouble getting work, and maybe the employer that you've been working with for the last 10, 15 years keeps bringing you back. But what if they don't next year, right? And what if you you think you have an amazing reputation from a customer service or team perspective, but maybe you don't have the best one, and maybe you do have a little bit of trouble finding the next job. Why not? Like, this is such an easy thing to do in the context of our work. It's such an easy thing to do to just make a tiny bit of effort to develop your soft skills, because that can make the difference between you getting hired somewhere else, or you getting, people wanting to recommend you to come over to work for this other company that they're with, or whatever, right? Because people do really notice. Your guide colleagues notice, your people in upper management notice. If you're really good, if you make guests feel amazing, your name is going to come up more often on comment cards, saying like, oh my gosh, Lauren was so awesome. She just was the best. And, who doesn't want that, right? The more often your name comes up, the more your colleagues love working with you and trust you and that kind of thing, the better. So it's not revolutionary. It's not going to suddenly shoot you to the top of the industry, but it can make a difference in your employability, in your recommendability, and your, how valuable your employer sees you based on the feedback that they're getting. And I would also say, from a personal perspective, that especially for people who have been doing it a long time and feel a little bit apathetic or a little bit burned out, building your customer service skills is so, how do you describe it? It's something that like really comes back to you in a good way, you know? So when you're really good to people and you make them feel really good, it really comes back to you. Like you feel so much better about what you're doing. You feel better about your work. You feel better about the connections that you make. So there's sort of an inherent feel good reason to do well at this, you know? And again, it's just like, it's a tiny bit of effort. It's just looking outside of yourself a little bit more instead of staying in your lane.
Yeah. Kit has just commented, this word always trips me up, but it's cyclical. I think that's how you say it. Like
yes, yes, that's the word I couldn't find.
It does come back to you. Yeah. There's a couple other great comments in here. I'm going to butcher the name, but Aviaha said another sort of soft skill or just thing to practice is benefit of doubt. So when someone comes off as being super rude, it might just be because, you know, English is their second language or, you know, so, and, you know, for English speaker, like we would assume that someone would say please or thank you, but if they don't, it might just be a language thing. And I like her comment here. The guests are not out to ruin your day. They're genuinely feeling frustrated or scared or uneasy, you know, again, like they're humans, you know, humans just like us. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. And can I say something on that as well? When I was, you know, working as PSM all those years, and because these days I mean, it's the pandemic, so nobody's working, but this last season before the pandemic, I didn't go south. But my team would always say to me, oh, I don't know how you do that role. Like, you know, because we always send the most challenging or the most angry people to you. Like we try to resolve it. And when we can't, they're like, go see Heather, you know? And they're like, everyone was like, I would never want your job. Oh, like, how do you do it? How can you manage? And I'm like, yeah, but these people aren't angry with me. And they're not even necessarily angry with the company. They're just frustrated and they want to be heard, you know? So that benefit of the doubt thing is it's absolutely crucial. And also understanding that people who are frustrated or angry or sad, which sometimes people feel devastated because of something that's happened, they want to feel heard. They want to feel seen, you know? And I can even think of scenarios where we had no good resolution for them. Like we literally couldn't do anything to make it feel better. But me or the EL in some cases sitting, and sometimes both of us, sitting with that person and saying like, we totally understand how difficult this is for you or how sad you are or how frustrated you are. Like we hear you 100%. What could make this better? You know? And asking them. And then when they're like, well, this, and we're like, well, we can't do that. But what within the confines of what are you know, what's available on this ship where we are right now, what do you feel we can do to make it better? And sometimes there was no real answer, but just the fact that we were there and asking them and engaging with them and showing empathy and not brushing them off, like that completely diffused some really big issues, you know? I mean, one I can think of is a whole climbing team that didn't get to do the crossing of South Georgia, you know, who had spent a lot of money and spent a lot of training, and we weren't able to get them to do the crossing because of weather, and they were wild. They got super upset. And so like, you know, it's benefit of the doubt. People are human. They come with big expectations, and you got to be there for them, you know, not necessarily individual guides, but like if you're involved in whatever's happening, then it's just being there. It's being there. It's listening. It's empathizing and saying, well, what can we do?
And all of that becomes more difficult and overwhelming when you are tired and exhausted and running out of time and running on your way to something. So maybe we could talk a little bit about like any extra effort that has to go into approaching our job this way. Any like, you know, extra energy or mental capacity. Like where does that come from, you know, for people who are already like, I am maxed out? Like, how does the EL manage this amongst a team, even just socializing in the whole, like socializing in the bar with guests, you know, having half the team eat with guests, like what's really realistic? You know, like we can imagine like the best case scenario, but if we were just to think about improving a little bit in the next season, like what actually do you think is possible, and how can it be managed by an EL and the ops manager?
Yeah, those are such good questions. And I just want to observe as well that the ideal scenario is actually rare, right? It's the beginning of the season. It's when we have a big changeover of staff who aren't coming tired from another ship. You know, like the ideal scenario is not the norm. The norm is some degree of tiredness, some degree of, you know, something.
And it's also really, in a way, it's like the cyclical thing again. Like, it's really easy to be super happy to engage with guests when the trip is going really, really well.
Yes.
You know, like you're hitting all your wildlife points, whatever. It's so easy and it's like a joy, but it's so much harder on a difficult trip. It's so easy to want to hide in your cabin on a bad day.
Oh, totally. And especially if it's late in the season and you're just like, I'm done. Like, I don't have time. I can't deal with other people's stuff. Like, I'm just kind of holding myself together because I'm tired and whatever, you know? So how do we manage it from an EL perspective? How do we manage it from a head office perspective? I think that from a head office perspective, what's important is not to have really rigid rules around expectations for your guides, because there will be fresher guides, there will be more tired guides, there will be extroverts, there will be introverts, there will be people who are amazing at empathy and customer service and people who are not very good at it or who are working on that skill set. And so if you have really rigid guidelines, like some companies I know are like, you absolutely have to eat with guests always at lunch and dinner. Like no wiggle room on that. Other companies do it like A and B teams, half and half. You know, Lauren, we talked offline before about some companies that require all guides to be in the bar until 11 o'clock at night, you know? And so having that kind of rigid structure can really backfire in terms of customer service, because all it is bodies and seats. It's kind of the equivalent of saying like what I think is an old school paradigm, which is requiring everybody to be in their office job from 9 to 5. Like, it's to me, like, how many of those hours are actually productive, right? If we put those kind of guidelines on people, we're not necessarily going to get the best out of our people. So being flexible from a head office perspective and putting the trust in your expedition leaders to be able to manage that team in the way that they need to be managed. And then from an expedition leader perspective, I think it's important to come on, you know, when you're starting the contract, really know who's already been on the ship for a long time, like who is starting to get maxed out, who's not, who's really happy to engage with passengers and who's not so much. And then listening to them and saying like, I'm a passenger service manager. I'm the customer facing person, me, Heather, and I'm a huge introvert. And so like before I ever stepped on a ship, when I was just a guest, I used to think I could never work on a ship. I could never be a guide. I would go absolutely crazy. I wouldn't have enough time like by myself. And then here I am with the most customer facing role you can imagine and developing it and then like building up the team to do this, you know? But what I think was really effective on the teams that I worked on, especially in that role, is that my best ELs always managed us based on those energies. And it's not that they let the introverts or the tired people off the hook. It's that they actually had a dialogue with them and said, hey, I know you're near the end of your contract. You're getting kind of tired. Like, I don't expect you to be in the bar every night, but like, we're going to have a games night tomorrow night and whatever. Like, of course, you know, we expect you to be there kind of thing, you know? And I think, yeah, playing to your team's strengths and weaknesses, recognizing that they're also human beings and that they also have agency, you know, and making sure that the people who are really good with guests don't take the lion's share of guest care, you know? So it does, in my opinion, ultimately, it kind of comes down to a really successful team comes down to how good of a people manager the EL is.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. And I fear that some ELs look at being an EL as being like a lead guide, like just being the best guide, the most experienced guide. But it is people management first and foremost, and it's a huge time zap. If you're going to do it well, you have to spend a lot of time getting to know your team and checking in with them throughout the course of a trip. And you know, your extroverts who are happy to eat dinner with guests every night, they might hit a road bump, and you need to know that they're, you know, being drained and not performing and not being happy. So I had a situation where I came in to lead a team that I hadn't worked with before, and in previous trips they've been expected to eat with guests and also be in the bar every other day. And that was, sort of an easy, simple way to break it up amongst the team, and that you knew your schedule so you could like plan ahead, I suppose. But I think the schedule part of it started to work against them. And I think they felt like they had such a lack of autonomy in how they spent their time.
Yeah.
So based on the alternating day schedule, if they had a really tiring bad day and didn't sleep well the night before, they were kind of out of luck because it was their day to be on. So we did away with that, which is quite a scary thing, especially when you don't know a team very well. You're like, am I totally going to screw this up? And will basically no one be spending any time with guests, and they'll just be hiding in their cabins. But that's not the case at all, because as soon as you give people freedom to manage their own time, to take breaks when they need to, they get that rest, and actually they want to go and have a chat with a guest that they connected with on their Zodiac cruise, or go to the bar and have a chat at night. And it does work out that way. It's just you have to take the leap of faith that your humans, your people can manage their own time and their own energy if you allow them to.
Totally. We all want agency, right? A lot of people think of it as freedom, but it's actually agency. It's choice over how we spend our time. That's why most of us are guides. We don't want to work in a structured environment, So why then impose structure on people that drains their energy and makes them apathetic? It's totally counterproductive.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just have about 5 more minutes. I wanted to chat a bit about your experience as an agent, because to me, a guest comes into existence on embarkation day when they walk up the gangway, and then they cease to exist when I see the bus driving away to the airport. But to you might be working with them a year in advance, and then several years afterwards as you book them on future trips. So can you just talk us about maybe just like a very quick overview of what that sort of booking process looks like? And also I'd be curious to know, like, what are the main questions that potential guests ask you that helps you determine what operator, vessel, or experience you would suggest for them?
Yeah, I mean, this I could talk about forever because everyone is so unique. But, we try to distill as quickly as possible, like age range, budget, if there's anything in particular that they really want to do. Like some people are like, I want to go to Antarctica and camp. And other people are like, I want to go to Antarctica and all I want to see are like baby chicks hatching, and like they have an idea in their mind often of something specific that they want. And so that's where we start. And then I start looking at the operators that are within their budget on the timeline, like when they want to travel and that would meet that need, whether it's the time of the season that they want to go or if it's the activity that they want to engage in. I'm just in the process now of booking someone who wants to go skiing. And there's only 2 operators that do skiing in Antarctica that are like the big operators, right? Some of the little yachts do, but I'm talking about the big guys. So it's really around that. And then, but we do often get questions like, oh, I'm really into history. Like, please book me on a trip where there's like an amazing historian, which is a bit trickier because although I have a huge like guide network because it's our company is myself, my husband, Rickard Berg, and his brother, David Berg, right? The Swedish twins. And most people in the industry know them or have heard of them. And they've worked on lots of different ships for lots of different companies. So between the 3 of us, like I can WhatsApp all over the place to find out who's who or who's working on what ship and what, and I can actually like match up guests with a ship that has someone that we know that's an awesome historian. That's the benefit of having a guide run agency. But we can't always do that. Nevertheless, we try. But that's kind of where people come to us. They come to us with those kinds of questions. Of course, they don't come to us with the expectation of good customer service because they're assuming if they're dropping $8,000 plus, because these days, like the cheapest berths are, well, like $7,500 and up, So they're coming with the expectation that the customer service on board is going to be amazing because this is a very high ticket trip that they're booking, right? And remember, on every ship, there's upper cabins. So like the upper cabins on some of these ships are like $20,000 per person. If you were paying $20,000 for a trip, you're not going to say to your agent, how's the customer service on board?
Yeah.
You're assuming it's going to be amazing. You're assuming that those guides are going to not make you feel stupid or not be dismissive towards you or unavailable or whatever, right? You're going to come with the assumption that things are going to go really well. And from my perspective as an agent, partially because of the work that I've done as an agent and feedback I've gotten from my clients where I've booked on different companies, and then partially because of my own experience as a guest, there are companies that I do not book on, because I just don't feel that they have a company mandate or build their teams up in a way that they treat guests right. And so they don't know that. Those companies don't know that, but I don't book with them.
Are you gonna name them now in public?
No. No, not at all. But unless someone comes to me and says, I want to book with X, like this is the company, then I'll be like, okay. I might say to them, well, have you thought about so-and-so? But like that piece of how well a company treats their guests is a big freaking deal to me as an agent, because I want my client to come back and say, that was the best trip I ever went on. It was amazing. The team was awesome. I hate it when I book someone on a trip and they come back and they say, I actually had a really bad experience. This is a true story. I had someone book in a $20,000 per person suite who came back on a really like high-end cruise ship. And she was like, the guides acted like we didn't exist. When we landed in Greenland, they put the gangway down. All of the guides took off, and all of the elderly passengers were like teetering down the gangway. And then one elderly woman fell and like broke her ankle, and there were no guides around. Like they were just like gone. And so she came back and complained, and she was like, I don't even understand how this company has the reputation that it has. It was shocking. So I don't want to book with them anymore, So that kind of stuff really matters to me as an agent. It really, really matters.
Yeah. So some guests come to us from an agent like you who works in the industry, knows all the the good and bad about every operator, but it's not even good and bad. It's just the different offerings, comfort level,
skiing, not skiing.
Excursions, yeah. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So some come being very informed and would never be the type of person to be like, oh, I didn't know that there was kayaking. And then a bunch of other ones come from a bigger agent who maybe hasn't been on board, and they come thinking that, they come in November thinking they're going to see penguin chicks. Well, there's really not much we can do, but what we can always do 5 months of the season is deliver on that customer service product, your promise, customer service promise. And ultimately, that's the thing that they're going to take home with them. Like they're not going to be like, I had the most amazing trip. I saw this. The team was so good. I just learned so much. Oh, I really miss those penguin chicks, And it just, if they really felt seen and had that amazing experience that we know most people have, then they'll book again and they'll come down in January and see those chicks a few years later. So yeah, yep. It's interesting to get the agent perspective. So we're going to wrap up. If anyone has any questions or things they want to throw out there, please do that now. And I'll just end with just a last question for Heather. So let's tackle our bonus question. So the added challenge, and I think, someone mentioned this in the comments, of catering to people of different cultures and language groups. It is an added challenge for sure. And it's interesting, again, with the team dynamics, is it a translator's job just to look after that language group? And I know different operators are more set up to handle this than others. So I'd just be curious what your opinions are on that with the trend in our industry for more different language groups. And something like diversity training or, inclusivity, is that something that we should be pursuing as expedition teams, more professional training like that?
That's a really good question. And, personally, I think that you can never go wrong with something like diversity training. we are an increasingly small world. We are increasingly dealing with international folks. You know, I think it can only be a good thing if we're investing the time and energy into learning how to be more facilitative to people who don't speak our language, and to learning how to be more empathetic and less it's very easy to be dismissive of people you can't communicate with, you know, especially when you're tired or they have a group leader and you're like, not my problem. But at the end of the day, even if you can't communicate in the same language, kindness translates, you know? People know when you're being dismissive towards them, you know? And even if it doesn't seem like they care, I mean, if you went on a trip of all, I don't know, like everyone else was Russian except you, you know, or you and 5 other people, right? And then they were like, well, we're not really going to include those people. We're not going to pay much attention to them because they have an English group leader, and we don't, you would, and you felt that there was a dismissiveness. Not that the Russians would do this. I'm just trying to think of like a group of people that I don't know how to communicate with. You wouldn't feel, it would feel different than if the Russian guides made an effort, you know, even if there was a language barrier. It feels different because kindness translates and empathy translates. And so while I think it's really important that companies make an effort to make sure that groups that come on board have a good quality group leader, or maybe even more than one, to be able to facilitate that group in their own language, I don't think that we as the rest of the guide team can just assume that it's not our problem. They are also our guests. They are also the people who are paying our wages, right? And it doesn't take much to be kind. It doesn't take much to lend a hand. It doesn't take much to even learn a few phrases in a different language if you know like that there's going to be a lot of people from that country on that particular season, you know? Like I remember there was one season where we had a bunch of, I think there were about 3 different Japanese groups that came through over the course of the season. And I lived in Japan like 100 years ago. So I knew like some basic Japanese phrases. And just when I was out on land and people were trying to like navigate on little like snow slopes and stuff, I would say to them in Japanese, oh, be careful, you know, here, like, let me help you. And they were like, oh, like, it just was amazing that I just said, like, take care, you know, or like, look out, or, oh, I can help you. Just like the tiniest little thing, you know, I couldn't communicate with them otherwise, but it takes so little effort to make a difference that can be really transformative for the people that we travel with and who
are
the people who are paying our wages ultimately.
It's such a good and simple message that you said kindness translates. It is simple, you know, like it can be overwhelming with, you know, even PTGA with its polar qualifications and like, oh, I need to get certified for this and certified for that and this job opportunity and that, like, really, I mean, as long as you're kind to people, everything else usually falls into place, whether that's with guests or your teammates is so important too. So I think this has been really fun and interesting, and the comments have been amazing. Thank you so much for people, you know, jumping in and adding your thoughts. So I want to thank Heather for being with us, an expert in so many different ways. And I love chatting with you about our shared passion for soft skills. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone tuning in. Hopefully a bunch can catch up after, but we've had a nice group here live today. So we just have one Guides Inside session left next week. This has been an 8-part series. And so next week, next Tuesday, we're finishing off with Jim Mayer, and he is doing a presentation called From PowerPoint to Performance, How to Turbocharge Your Talks. And I've chatted with Jim, and I'm super excited for his talk. He comes from a theater background that has a lot of thoughts about how to prepare your mind and body before giving a presentation, and a lot about calming your nerves and just how to articulate your thoughts and how to like pivot while you're speaking. And I just found it fascinating. So I hope that you'll join us next week for Jim's talk. And that's basically it. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you later. See ya. Bye.
Bye.